Okay, then there is a second way to define systemic discrimination, and that is disparate impact. Disparate impact is the idea that if you pass a law and has a disparate impact on one group, meaning one group is harder hit than another group, that this is an element of racism. I will not endorse that version of systemic racism because every single law that has ever been passed in human history impacts groups differently. There are people who say that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Tell that to the dead women and children in Sderot. Tell that to Hamas, who proclaim in their charter, quote, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it.
Ben Shapiro. Regardless of what you feel or think about him, he is extremely popular among young and old conservatives alike. His videos are often presented as paragons of truth and beacons of rationality in an age where political discourse has been minimized to name-calling and pettiness. And that's particularly true when he's destroying the black community or the minorities, when he feels they're being sensitive, victimizing themselves, or inserting racism into everything that directly links back to their community. After all,
forget about the disrespect. Facts don't care about your feelings.
That's his trademark slogan. Now, here's my problem with Ben Shapiro. He has dedicated his platform to fighting wokeism and snowflakes, and that's okay. But will someone kindly explain how or why he always switches to hypersensitive snowflake mode when discussing issues that affect his own community? Oh, he's Jewish, by the way, if the article and his recent Twitter tirade didn't give it away. Whenever a social issue involves directly or indirectly criticizing Israel, the Jewish community, he instantly pulls out the anti-Semitism card as a silencing tactic in an effort to shut down any further intelligent discourse. But don't just take my word for it, I'll give you multiple examples in today's video. All I want you to do is replace the Jewish or anti-Semitism part with black, Arab, Asian, or racism and tell me if Shapiro will agree with his own remarks. Here's what Ben Shapiro had to say when Morgan Freeman called for empathy for black people's issues in regards to police brutality after the death of George Floyd.
Okay, so Morgan Freeman led off the season with a bizarre, meaningless video about empathy. Because, of course, the implication is that if you disagree with kneeling for America's systemic racism, you're not empathetic. Right? That is the goal of this particular video.
Change and create a new canvas of optimism. Empathy must lead the charge. This moment signifies our charge, our brotherhood, our unity. Equality and unity cannot be until there is empathy. Today and every day, we come together as brothers, as equals, all with the same goal, to level the playing field.
Okay, there's only one problem. Okay, empathy is actually kind of bad for politics. The reason that empathy is bad for politics is because it leads you to empathize with people that you are more likely to like, as opposed to people you don't like. Okay, so first of all, the pitch for empathy is actually, there have been several books that are written on this, social science books, talking about how empathy is not actually the best thing for politics. It actually almost deactivates the reasoning centers of your brain. Because when you're empathetic, you don't actually create good policy.
So calling for empathy in the wake of a tragedy is not only meaningless, but also bad for politics, according to Ben Shapiro at least. He thinks cool heads should prevail and we should tackle these issues from all sides with objectivity in mind. And you know what? While I think that's the coldest and stupidest thing I've heard in a long time, let's see what Ben Shapiro thinks when a tragedy strikes his own community and people try to apply intellectualism to the situation.
There are those out there who are proclaiming the complexity of it all. Those people are fools. They are fools, and what is worse, they are enablers of evil. They are fellow travelers. They are justifiers of the worst human rights violators on the planet. People who target civilians and hide behind them. Today, I'm going to let evil show you its face. Do not turn away. Look. This weekend, this was the worst day for Jews since the Holocaust. Do not turn away. Look. Look it in the face. And I know that you will. I know you will, because I'm a Jew and because I'm an American. Americans love justice. Americans love the good. Americans resonate to the book of Psalms that says, hate evil, those who love the Lord. Hate evil, and fight it. Americans always have, and they always will. I know we will.
Come on, Shapiro. I thought appealing to emotions and calling for empathy should be left to social justice warriors like myself. You're supposed to be making fun of people who have suffered tragedies, remember? And these double standards aren't a new thing for Ben Shapiro. The next clip you're about to look at is an old one, and Ben Shapiro somehow manages to prove both points in the same video.
Everyone in the media is talking about the most important thing that has ever happened in the history of humanity, or at least since Caitlyn Jenner became a woman, a transgender woman.
I don't understand.
And that, of course, is the release of Black Panther. It is so deeply important It is, we've heard is deeply important to millions of black Americans who, after all, were not liberated from slavery 200 years ago and liberated by the civil rights movement with federal legislation, have not been gradually restored to what always should have been full civil rights in the United States. I mean, none of that has mattered up till they made a Marvel movie about a superhero who is black in a country filled with black people. That's the change, right? Blade was not enough. Catwoman with Halle Berry, no. Okay, Wakanda is where it is. This is the most important moment in black American history. Not Martin Luther King, not Frederick Douglass, not the Civil War, not the end of Jim Crow, none of that. Not Brown versus Board. The most important thing is that Chadwick Boseman puts claws on his hands and a mask on his face and runs around jumping off cars in CGI fashion. Deeply, deeply important. Black children everywhere will now believe that they too can be superheroes who jump off cars in fictional countries. It's very important. Now, you may sense that I'm mocking a little bit. The reason I'm mocking a little bit is because I hate this kind of identity politics. I think it's incredibly stupid. I think it's incredibly stupid because, again, I grew up as an Orthodox Jewish kid where no American president has been Jewish. And no American president has been an Orthodox Jew. And yet, I grew up on 1776, essentially worshiping the founding fathers, none of whom were Jewish. Right? And yesterday, my daughter actually was on Shabbat. So I was sitting around with my daughter, and my daughter was talking about how she's talking about the presidents because she's learning about the presidents in preschool. She's very politically active, my daughter. She's 4 years old, and she knows many of the presidents. She is familiar with the life stories of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. And she said, "Daddy, was George Washington Jewish?" And I said, "No, he wasn't." And she said, "Is Donald Trump Jewish?" And I said, "No, he's not." And she said, "Have any of the presidents been Jewish?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Why haven't any of the presidents been Jewish?" And she's 4, so I didn't go into the full explanation. But what I said is, they just haven't been. But maybe there'll be a Jewish president in the future. Would you like to be president one day? She said, "I don't know. It sounds boring." And so, which I think is an astute observation.
Was Ben Shapiro mad that black people were happy about Black Panther, or because you haven't had a Jewish superhero and president yet? I can't tell which. But if it's the latter, I too would love to see a Jewish Marvel superhero that's not just Jesus Christ or the Zohan. But why did you have to take a jab at the black community and the work of art that is Black Panther just to bring that point forth? And I also didn't know there was a threshold for things black people could be happy about in America. So we can't celebrate Black Panther and simultaneously thank God for the Civil Rights Act. Now, you all remember the mayhem called by Jason Aldean after the release of his song, Try That in a Small Town. One of the main complaints from people on the left was that the song is a dog whistle for white supremacists, particularly since Aldean chose to shoot the whole video in front of the Maury County Courthouse, a site famous for the lynching of an 18-year-old black boy named Harry Short in 1927. Let's hear what Ben Shapiro had to say about this criticism.
Now, then they go to their backup argument. Their backup argument is he filmed this in a town that 102 years ago had a lynching. You got to be kidding. You really think that Jason Aldean was like, well, I'm going to go to a town that had a lynching 102 years ago, and that's where I'm going to film this video because that's where I really want this film. It's subtle. It's a subtle race bait. Like, come on. Pathetic dweebs. Think that people are sitting around thinking like this? They're not. Nobody is thinking like this. Good for Jason Aldean for not backing down. He shouldn't apologize.
I'm not too mad. Ben Shapiro, being the intellectual he is, doesn't believe in dog whistles and implications. Who am I to fault him for that? The only problem is this trail of thought was all of a sudden lost on him when he decided to call Jamie Foxx an anti-Semite when he made that Instagram post. And this is even though virtually everyone understood and made it clear that Jamie Foxx wasn't targeting Jews in his post about fake friends.
Well, the latest example of black anti-Semitism, one is being ignored, one is not being ignored as much. Jamie Foxx, over the weekend, wrote a post on Instagram saying, quote, "They killed this dude named Jesus. What do you think they'll do to you?" Followed by the hashtags fake friends and fake love. The actor later deleted the post, not before being accused of anti-Semitism on social media. Because, of course, they killed this dude named Jesus. Very often that is used by people who don't like Jews very much to refer to Jews. Jennifer Aniston liked the post before it was deleted, and then she unliked it. And she said, "I didn't like this post on purpose or by accident," so apparently it was miraculous. "More importantly, I want to be clear to my friends and anyone hurt by showing up in their feeds. I do not support any form of anti-Semitism. I truly don't tolerate hate of any kind, period." Now, Fox posted an apology. He said, "I want to apologize to the Jewish community and everyone who's offended by my post. I know my choice of words has caused offense, and I'm sorry. That was never my intent." He said instead he was referring to a fake friend who had betrayed him. Apparently, there was also speculation that this sort of phraseology is used frequently in the black community, suggesting they killed Jesus, which sometimes an imprecation with regard to Jews. So Jamie Foxx backs off that one.
Really, man? Really? You know, at least I'm glad that even you struggle to find words that could justify your unsubstantiated accusations. And also within the same video, Ben Shapiro goes on to accuse Cardi B of anti-Semitism even though she was literally praising Jews.
Meanwhile, Cardi B just gets away with sort of the most outrageous Jewish stereotyping available. So Cardi B, and again, as a person who is not a connoisseur of her entire oeuvre, Cardi B, who is a deeply unintelligent human being, she tweeted out the other day a picture of two Hasidic Jews. And these Jews are in like the full Hasidic garb, probably in Brooklyn. One is wearing a shtreimel, which is the kind of furry round hat that you see sometimes. The other is wearing a black hat and is also wearing a bekisha, which is kind of a long black jacket. The etymology of these things, they go back to Poland. And a very stereotypical picture of like ultra-Orthodox Jews. And she says, remember, ... What exactly is she referring to? Apparently, she's referring to a line in her Shakespearean song, Bickenhead, in which she says this. Okay, so lawyer is a Jew is the line, right? Lawyer is a Jew, he gonna get my money, right? Again, the idea being that so there is a typical Jewish stereotype that Jews are disproportionately lawyers. It's not a stereotype, that's true. Jews are disproportionately lawyers, doctors, accountants. There are a lot of different industries in which Jews represent a disproportionate share of members of the industry. What is actually stereotypical and anti-Semitic is the implication that if you take a picture of two very Hasidic Jews, that this is somehow representative of like her Jewish lawyers. Now, we actually have pictures of her Jewish lawyers. Okay. Her Jewish lawyers look like secular Reform Jews at the very, very best. Do these look like the Jews that you just saw on the streets of New York? And the idea that all Jews are the same is a hell of a stereotype. If I was like, wow, rappers, and then I just posted a picture of Barack Obama and Eric Holder, you'd be like, that's a little racist, isn't it? That seems like a little racist. Cardi B, however, says this kind of stuff on the routine and no problem whatsoever. And this is true throughout, unfortunately, rap culture. This stuff is posted routinely by people ranging from like Ice Cube to Cardi B. And everybody just goes, whatever. Is that really a big deal? Well, I mean, it would be if we were talking about any other race attacking members of any other race.
Isn't this the kind of sensitivity and snowflakism that Ben Shapiro has clearly dedicated his platform to fighting against? Also, has the definition of anti-Semitism changed? Because according to Shapiro, apparently even positivity about Jews can be misconstrued as anti-Semitism. Now, this video will be incomplete if we did not touch on Ben Shapiro's problematic remarks surrounding Asians. It is not only not racist to call coronavirus the Chinese virus, a term directly targeting the Chinese government, not Chinese people. It is both accurate and necessary as the Chinese government distributes propaganda blaming everyone but their own shitty government for this. So yeah, Ben Shapiro makes it quite clear that criticism of the Chinese government, even knowing his virtues, could literally be misinterpreted as an attack on the Chinese themselves. He claims his criticism shouldn't be taken as an attack on the Chinese themselves. And you know what? Once again, let's say I agree with him, even though he made the tweet in the wake of a spike in anti-Asian hate crimes in America. So let's give it to him and go ahead to see how Ben Shapiro reacts when anyone dares criticize the Israeli government. And remember that in this next video, Ilhan Omar was responding to a comment by Bibi Netanyahu where he said that Israel is the national state not of all its citizens but only of the Jewish people.
Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Okay, that is definitional anti-Semitism according to the State Department. Here's Ilhan Omar doing exactly that in the last month.
When I see Israel institute law that recognizes it as a Jewish state and does not recognize the other religions that are living in it, and we still uphold it as a democracy in the Middle East, I almost chuckle because I know that if we see that in any other society, we would criticize it, we would call it out. We do that to Iran, we do that to any other place that sort of upholds its religion.
Okay, she's just lying now. She's lying openly. Muslims have more rights in Israel than they do in any Muslim state anywhere in the Middle East. Islam is a religion that is protected by Israeli law. Mosques are protected by Israeli law. The Islamic Waqf controls the holiest site in Judaism, the Temple Mount itself. She's just full of it.
This dude gives us the definition of anti-Semitism and then still gives us an example that doesn't even remotely match that definition. And I have two things to say about that. First, no one cares or is against Jews having a set of their own, especially after their mistreatment in Europe. But that doesn't mean Zionists get to go around kicking everyone out of their homes and oppressing them for decades because you're a resistant anti-Semite if you disagree with the way we are going about establishing our own state. Second, Ilanoma's criticism was valid. When the Prime Minister of a nation with multiple ethnicities makes such a charged reference at the same time his administration is killing minorities left, right and center, only a fool like Ben Shapiro will characterize any criticism of his statements as anti-Semitism. And simply because Islam is protected under Israeli law doesn't mean that Arabs in the country aren't prosecuted. Lucky for you guys, I also saved the best double standard for last.
We have so much footage pouring in of protesters at various universities demonstrating their moral evil. It is impossible to go through all of it, but we'll start with Columbia. Here's some protesters at Columbia. And shouting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." That slogan, of course, is a genocidal slogan meant to destroy literally every Jew in the region. And as we've seen from Hamas, we know exactly what that means. That means the full-scale slaughter of Jews. And those are Americans, presumably, who are shouting that in the middle of the Columbia University campus. Now, remember, these are campuses that are deeply worried about microaggressions. But if you shout, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," that, like, directly the same week that 1,300 Jews were murdered in their beds, well, then that's just, complex moral nuance because multiculturalism, gang, it's just a different culture. It's just a different type of thinking. And we got
So shouting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is a genocidal slogan calling for the destruction of all Jews. Especially when the slogan is used in the wake of Hamas's attacks that left 1,200 innocent Israelis dead, right? So tell me why, when you tweeted that there should be no Palestinian state aside from Jordan ever, and people call you out for your genocidal language, you claim they were reaching and misinterpreting what you really meant. And that's regardless of the fact you've been treating such nonsense in the wake of conflicts that always leave thousands of Palestinians dead. And I personally don't think Shapiro should be trusted given he's also the same person that wrote an article titled "Enemy Civilian Casualties Okay by Me." Yeah, but you need the racist, no genocidal. And for those who claim that it's an old article and perhaps Ben Shapiro has changed since then, get out of here, man. Firstly, I don't remember ever being genocidal in my life at any age, and I don't know anyone who ever was. Second, if you think it's changed, then why don't you point to any content where he has called for restraint from the Israeli government in an effort to preserve the lives of Palestinian children and women? And it can be even before the recent attacks by Hamas. Please, go ahead. Because in fact, if anything, since the attacks on October 7th on innocent Israelis, you've seen Shapiro both on Twitter and YouTube spewing nonsense and genocidal propaganda relentlessly. The main one being that anyone who dares stand with innocent Jews as well as the Palestinians' fight for freedom is not only morally bankrupt, but also an anti-Semite.
because we are going already, you can feel it happening. We are already going back to our Western priors, which is everyone's reasonable. Everyone can have a conversation. All cultures are basically equivalent. Everyone wants to be free, and it's not true. It's not true. The people who are shouting "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," those people are not friends of the West. Those are enemies of the West. Those are people who hate the West just as much as they hate Israel. Those are people who are fully willing to give their full backing to a murderous, genocidal, anti-Jewish group. And then we all kind of like brush it off because we don't want to see. We don't want to see. The blinders are right back on. You can.
Through the 65-minute video, he nonchalantly brings up the issue of cultural differences and how these protesters' cultures is not only inferior, but also in direct opposition to Israel's and America's values. This is the same argument he uses to justify any oppressive and violent policies that Israel has instituted in Gaza and the West Bank. And it's ironic, you know. For someone who can't bring up the Holocaust whenever people criticize the settler colony of Israel, it's ironic that he's always justifying genocide using the exact same rhetoric spewed in Europe that culminated in the Holocaust. For those who don't know, the Nazi Party quite literally gained popularity in huge part by presenting Jews as the source of the social, economic, and ethical clashes plaguing the German people, and the Jewish culture as a cancer that will destroy the country. Finally, to close the video, Here is a video of Ben Shapiro where he's complaining about a $100 billion bill package that Joe Biden passed. He complains that $60 billion of that amount will go to Ukraine, while America has already spent a lot on the country. Him, alongside other conservatives, have been very vocal that America should use its money to focus on its own issues and not other countries. However, within the same video, he also complains because a portion of the cash should go to humanitarian efforts in Gaza, but then complains that the money America set aside for Israel isn't quite enough. Yeah, I don't get him either. He basically tries to justify how the situation in Israel is more urgent than the situation in Ukraine, even though Israel is on the offensive and Ukraine is on the defensive.
Okay, meanwhile, Joe Biden has put forward a bill. This bill is a $100 billion bill. Now, you might ask yourself, how much of that is actually going to support material aid for Israel, since that's what we're really talking about here? It's an emergency aid package for Israel. The answer is, of that $100 billion, $14 billion. 14. Now, listen, it may be that because the Republicans couldn't hit the side of the barn if they were trying to pee on it, that they have to vote for this thing. It may be that because Republicans don't even have a speaker, that the best available option, because of the urgency of the situation, and because Israel needs the aid like right the hell now, they need to be rearmed to destroy Hamas, they need to be rearmed to deter Hezbollah and prevent the region from spinning into a broader war, that there may not be a choice but to push for it, which again just exposes Republican incompetence in not having a Speaker of the House. Because if they had a Speaker of the House, you know what they could do? They could separate these into individual bills and force Democrats to vote no on Israel aid in order to get them to push an omnibus package, which would expose the real agenda here, which is the omnibus package. In any case, what Joe Biden is actually proposing is a $105 billion urgent funding request for the next year. It includes $60 billion for Ukraine. Now, remember, we've already spent $75 billion on Ukraine, minimum. So $60 billion on Ukraine. A lot of that is for replenishing U.S. weapons stockpiles that have already been provided. $14 billion for Israel in the face of existential threat. $10 billion for humanitarian efforts. So you might ask yourself, what's that $10 billion for humanitarian efforts? I've been assured by members of Congress, that's for Gaza. So if you're worried about $100 million being given to Hamas right now in the middle of a terror war where they hold American citizens hostage, get ready for $10 billion to be given to completely unreliable sources in the Gaza Strip. Now, what we can hope is that at least some of the senators, Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, will actually prevent that aid from being deployed absent certain conditions in the bill. We can hope and pray, because the idiotic idea of giving Israel $14 billion in military aid to destroy Hamas and then giving the people on the other side $10 billion to rebuild all of the terrorist infrastructure that Israel just destroyed is totally insane, totally crazy. Giving billions of dollars to the Palestinian Authority is totally nuts. However, the situation in Ukraine is not anything remotely like the urgency of the situation with Israel. And so the fact that Biden is trying to wrap these two together in order to get his Ukraine aid is pretty gross, considering that, again, Americans are pretty split on the future of Ukraine aid absent a plan to exit that particular conflict. And Americans are not split at all on aid to Israel. So Biden is trying to use goodwill for Israel to cram through $60 billion in aid to Ukraine.